They called it a quarterly update meeting. The email had gone out 3 days earlier with a vague subject line and a conference room number, no agenda. No pre-read documents attached, just a time, a room, and the kind of corporate politeness that usually means something terrible is about to happen in a very organized way. I noticed the cameras the moment I stepped inside. Two of them, positioned on tripods at the back of the room, both aimed at the podium where Patricia Richardson was already standing. Our CEO, polished as always, navy blazer, not a hair out of place, the kind of composed that people practice in mirrors. The board members who normally joined by phone were physically present, seated in a row along the left wall like they had been briefed in advance. The head of legal was there. The head of HR was there. Even a few faces I recognized from the Pinnacle Capital Acquisition team were seated quietly near the door. I had walked into hundreds of high-pressure rooms during my 32 years at Meridian Technologies. I had managed security infrastructure through government audits, emergency data breaches, and last-minute contract failures. I knew what a room full of prepared people looked like, and this room was very, very prepared. I took a seat near the back and folded my hands on the table. My name is Tom Anderson. I am 58 years old. And in approximately 4 minutes, I would be fired in front of every senior person in the company I'd spent the better part of my adult life protecting. Patricia stepped to the podium and adjusted the microphone. She looked at the cameras first, then at the board members, then at the Pinnacle representatives. She never looked at me. Not once during what followed did she make direct eye contact, which told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person she was at her core. She could only fire someone if she did not have to actually face them. After careful evaluation of Meridian's strategic direction, she began, we have determined that certain legacy roles are no longer aligned with where this company is headed. Legacy roles. I had heard euphemisms before, but that one landed differently. 32 years condensed into 2 words. Legacy. Role. As if the 3 decades I had spent building the very infrastructure her merger depended on were some kind of antique she had finally decided to donate. Then she said my full name. Thomas Anderson will be transitioning out of his position effective immediately. The room shifted. A few people near the front clapped softly, the way people clap at a memorial service when they are not sure if applause is appropriate. Most just stared at the table. Jim Walsh, who ran security operations and who I had personally recommended for his position 8 years earlier, looked at a spot on the wall about 6 inches above my head. He could not meet my eyes either. I did not move. I did not argue. I did not give Patricia what she clearly wanted, which was visible distress on camera for any investors watching the live stream who might have been nervous about whether leadership could make tough decisions. I sat there with my back straight and my hands still and let the silence do what silence does. I absorbed it. I filed it. I waited. Inside, my stomach was doing something I had not felt since the night Sarah died. A kind of hollow burning that is not quite pain and not quite anger and is actually much worse than either. I thought about the mortgage. $312,000 still outstanding. I thought about Ryan, my son, in his first year at MIT on a scholarship that still left a significant gap I had promised to cover. I thought about what it actually means to be 58 years old with a specialized skill set in an industry that treats age like a liability and experience like a file they no longer have storage space for. But I kept my face neutral and I waited. Patricia wrapped up the announcement with the usual language about gratitude and contribution and the company's bright future. She mentioned the Pinnacle merger exactly once, framing it as the exciting opportunity that necessitated this kind of forward-thinking transition. Then the meeting moved on to other business, the way all cruelty in professional settings moves on, efficiently and without ceremony. Jim appeared beside me, about 20 minutes later, after the room had mostly emptied. He had 2 security badges in his hand, mine and a visitor pass. His jaw was tight. He looked like a man who had rehearsed this conversation several times and still did not feel ready. "Tom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry, this isn't right." I looked at the visitor pass he was holding out. I looked at my own badge, which I had carried in my left jacket pocket every working day for over 3 decades. I thought about all the nights I had answered calls at 2 in the morning when a system flag came in. All the weekends I had driven into the office because something in the infrastructure needed a human eye on it, and I was the one who understood it best. All the times I had caught problems before they became disasters, which meant nobody ever knew how bad things might have been. "Just do your job, Jim," I said. "You've got a family." We walked toward the glass doors together. The open office floor was quiet in the way that spaces get quiet when everyone has decided to perform concentration at the same time. Nobody stopped me. Ryan's graduation photo was already in my bag, along with the smaller photo of Sarah I kept on the corner of my desk. She was laughing in that one. Hand pressed over her heart the way she did when something genuinely surprised her with its joy. I had taken that photo the summer before her diagnosis, before any of us knew what was coming. I carried it out of the building without looking back. The drive home took 40 minutes in traffic. I spent most of it with the radio off, which I almost never did. Silence felt appropriate, the kind of silence that is not empty but full of everything you are not ready to say out loud yet. That evening, the apartment was quiet in a different way. Ryan was out with his study group, completely unaware that the financial scaffolding underneath his MIT education had just been knocked loose. I made coffee I did not particularly want and sat at the kitchen table, watching the city lights reflect off the window, thinking about the last time I had updated my resume. It had been 19 years. At 58, unemployment does not feel like a pause. It does not feel like a chance to breathe or reassess or any of the other words people use to make career disruption sound like opportunity. It feels like a very specific kind of math problem where the numbers keep coming out wrong. Age is a factor in that math whether anyone admits it or not. I had seen it happen to colleagues over the years. Smart people, experienced people, reduced to sending 300 applications into the digital void and trying not to notice when the interviews dried up after the hiring managers saw their graduation year. I sat with all of that for 3 days. Then Patricia called. I was standing at my kitchen counter in yesterday's sweatshirt, staring at a job board on my laptop that listed 17 senior security positions I was overqualified for, but would likely be screened out of, for reasons nobody would put in writing. My phone buzzed against the counter. Meridian's executive line. I looked at it for 4 full rings. She had fired me on camera in front of lawyers, board members, and acquisition team representatives from a $950 million deal. She had called my career a legacy role. She had stood at a podium and reduced 32 years to a transition announcement without ever once looking me in the face. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally played the message, the voice on the recording sounded nothing like the woman I had watched at that podium. The polish was gone. What was left was something between controlled panic and an executive who had just discovered the floor was not where she thought it was. "Tom, please pick up. The merger documents are not clearing. Legal cannot get the authorization chain to complete. Pinnacle is asking questions every hour and I don't have answers. The board is asking too. I know things ended badly, and I know this is a difficult call to make, but we can work something out. Please call me back." I listened to the message once. Then I deleted it. No lengthy reply drafted in my head. No dramatic decision to make. Just one press of my thumb, and Patricia's panic was gone. I went back to my coffee. Outside, the morning traffic moved through the streets with total indifference, the way the world always keeps moving through other people's consequences. Here is what Patricia had not understood when she planned my departure. 15 years earlier, when Meridian was trying to compete for its first major government defense contracts, they brought me in from Northrop Grumman specifically to build something that could withstand federal compliance scrutiny. What I built was a 4-layer verification framework. The first layer handled standard user access and credentials. The second verified legal authority, checking whether the person approving a document actually had the contractual right to do so. The third confirmed financial authorization against audited budget records. But the fourth layer was something I designed myself, a final encrypted security review that cross-referenced all 3 previous layers, checked authorization patterns against historical baselines, and required a unique confirmation code to complete. Without that code, no merger document, government contract, or high-value agreement could advance to executed status. The system would hold everything in a compliance pending state indefinitely, logging every attempted action until proper authorization was verified. I was the only person at Meridian who had ever been fully trained on that final layer. Not because I had insisted on it, but because for 12 years, every time I recommended we bring in a backup, it had been deprioritized. Too expensive. Too time-consuming. We have you, Tom. We have you. The $950 million merger with Pinnacle Capital had been moving through the system for months. Contracts, due diligence documents, regulatory filings, executive signature packages. All of it had been building toward a final authorization sequence that needed to clear my framework before a single document became legally binding. Patricia had stood at that podium and fired me like I was a maintenance worker she was replacing with a cheaper vendor. She had never paused to consider that the building she was trying to sell had one door that only I knew how to unlock. Amanda Foster called 2 days after Patricia. Amanda was the lead attorney on the Pinnacle merger, sharp and efficient, someone I had always respected for knowing her limits and staying within them. The call did not start the way I expected. "Tom," she said, keeping her voice carefully calm. "We have a procedural issue with the final authorization sequence on the merger documents. I want to be upfront that this is a formality at this point, but we do need your digital confirmation to clear the compliance hold." Formality. That word again. The same word Patricia had used when she stripped away a career. The same tone Meridian had always used when they wanted my expertise delivered without my opinions attached to it. "Amanda," I said, "I built that system. If the documents are in compliance hold, it is not a formality. It means the final authorization failed because the proper authorization chain is not complete, which is correct, because I am no longer an authorized signatory on anything related to Meridian." Silence. Then Amanda shifted to a different kind of language, the kind reserved for conversations where one party needs the other to put institutional good above personal grievance. She talked about the employees whose livelihoods depended on the merger closing. She talked about shareholders. She talked about the broader economic consequences of a deal this size failing at the final stage. I let her finish. I thought about Ryan's tuition and my mortgage, and the fact that I was a 58-year-old man who had just had his expertise labeled a legacy role in front of cameras. "Amanda," I said, "you want to talk about jobs at stake. I just lost mine after 32 years. I do not have a legal obligation to assist Meridian with anything, and I do not intend to." I ended the call before she could respond. Meridian's stock dropped 12 points by the following morning. I watched the ticker from my kitchen table with a second cup of coffee, which I actually finished this time. The financial networks described it as a procedural delay related to technical authorization issues on the pending acquisition. Markets do not panic over paperwork. They panic when confidence breaks. And confidence in Patricia's ability to close the biggest deal of her career was breaking very publicly, very fast. Investors who had been told the merger was on track were now reading between the lines of every carefully worded press release and finding the space where certainty used to be. That evening, an email appeared in my personal inbox. No name in the sender field, no subject line. Just a message that read, "They need you more than they think. The other side is already paying attention." It was signed with 2 initials, AR. I sat with that for a long time. Alex Rivera had been on my IT team for 6 years, before moving to a senior infrastructure role. He was one of maybe 4 people at Meridian who had ever taken a genuine interest in how the verification framework actually functioned, rather than just trusting it to work. I could not confirm it was him, but the message felt like something that came from someone who understood the system. The next morning, another message from the same address. She is going to announce a workaround. Check the business section. I opened the business news and found it quickly. Buried beneath a Pinnacle Capital spokesperson's careful language was a single sentence that told me everything. Certain technical authorizations remain outstanding, and we are evaluating all available options. That was not the language of a deal proceeding on schedule. That was the language of sophisticated people who had done their homework and discovered that the authorization problem was not a paperwork issue at all. It was a people issue. And the person they needed was no longer employed by the company they were trying to buy. Patricia's next move was exactly what I expected from someone who had built her career on optics. She held a press conference, same cameras, same podium, same polished composure. She announced that Meridian's legal and technical teams had identified a workaround for what she called a minor legacy authorization issue. Full clearance within 24 hours, she promised. The merger was on track. Pinnacle remained a committed partner. Everything was under control. I was eating a peanut butter sandwich when I watched it on my laptop. I almost felt something close to pity. What Patricia did not know, because she had never asked and I had never offered, was that the verification framework I built had not simply been designed to check approvals. It had been designed to learn. After 12 years of processing legitimate authorizations, the system had developed a detailed behavioral baseline for what compliant transactions looked like. Approved credentials, proper sequencing, authorization patterns that matched historical records, timing that aligned with documented business hours and established workflows. Any attempt to introduce new credentials, bypass established approval chains, or submit documents through an unrecognized pathway triggered a different protocol entirely. Not an error, not a lockout. Something more precise. The system accepted the submission long enough to fingerprint it completely, documenting every credential used, every authorization attempted, every file accessed. Then it invalidated the transaction, locked the documents under extended compliance review, and stamped every record with a time-stamped audit trail that no subsequent action could alter or remove. When Meridian's legal team entered their workaround at 11:47 in the morning, the system let them believe it was working for approximately 9 minutes. Then the failsafe completed its record. By 1 in the afternoon, the entire merger document package had been flagged as legally unverifiable. Every version of every agreement, every signature page, every amendment and addendum, all of it frozen under an extended compliance hold that required not just proper authorization to resolve, but a full independent audit of every action taken since the initial hold began. The $950 million merger was not delayed. It was dead. My phone started buzzing within the hour. Former colleagues, most of them carefully neutral in their messages. "Tom, is it true the system rejected everything? And did you build something into the framework for this kind of situation?" I did not answer any of them. Whatever I had or had not built into that framework was documented in the architecture files I had maintained carefully for 15 years. The system's behavior spoke for itself. The markets reacted before most of the office lights went dark at Meridian that evening. By morning, the same financial outlets that had treated Patricia's press conference as authoritative were using words like catastrophic and leadership failure and due diligence collapse. Pinnacle's stock dipped slightly in sympathy trading. Meridian's kept falling. That evening, a New York number appeared on my phone. I did not recognize it, but something made me answer. "Mr. Anderson." A man's voice, unhurried. "My name is Brian Matthews. I'm the CO at Pinnacle Capital. I hope this isn't an intrusion." I told him it was fine. "Our technical team has spent the past 48 hours reviewing the situation with Meridian's authorization infrastructure," he said. "We've confirmed that the compliance hold is the direct result of your framework functioning exactly as it was designed to function, which means the framework worked correctly. Meridian chose to address their authorization problem by eliminating the authorization problem, which turned out to be you." He paused for a moment, then continued with the kind of directness that told me he had not spent much of his career learning to soften things. "Meridian underestimated you, Mr. Anderson. We have no intention of making the same mistake." Another pause. "We'd like to discuss whether there's a path forward for you at Pinnacle." I was sitting at my kitchen table with the same unemployment forms I had been staring at for days. Ryan's MIT acceptance letter was propped against the fruit bowl. Sarah's photograph was on the counter where I had placed it after unpacking my bag from that last walk out of Meridian. I looked at all of it while Brian Matthews waited. "I'm listening," I said. "The offer came clearly and without theater. Chief Technology Officer, Pinnacle's Infrastructure Division, $280,000 annually. Full benefits package. Equity options that vested over 4 years, and a specific mandate to design and implement a security verification framework for Pinnacle's entire acquisition portfolio, because after watching Meridian's collapse from the outside, they had concluded that their own authorization infrastructure needed the kind of architecture that could not be bypassed by people in a hurry. There was one condition which Matthews stated plainly before I could ask. We need to know there's no possibility of reconciliation with Meridian, no last-minute arrangement, no consultant agreement, no situation where we build something together, and then Meridian finds a way to bring you back to resolve their problem. I looked at Patricia's email sitting in my inbox, which I had not opened. I thought about the cameras and the podium and the careful way she had never looked at my face when she dismantled 32 years into a transition announcement. "Mr. Matthews," I said, "that bridge is not just burned, it is ash." A brief silence, then, "Good, welcome to Pinnacle." What I did not fully understand yet was what Pinnacle's compliance team had found when they began their independent audit of the failed merger. The audit had been initiated immediately after the workaround attempt, as standard protocol when a deal collapses at authorization. What the outside compliance firm discovered was not simply a frozen merger. What they found was 18 months of flagged activity that my framework had been quietly logging, and that Meridian's executive team had been quietly ignoring. Backdated approvals on vendor contracts. Payments routed through entities with no documentable business history. Executive signatures attached to amended contracts that had never passed proper review. Authorization patterns that my system had flagged as inconsistent with legitimate behavior, and that had been overridden at the executive level without explanation. The logs did not interpret the data. They simply preserved it. But what they preserved, once reviewed by people who knew how to read it, told a very specific story. The audit findings went to federal regulators before the end of the week. I was in my kitchen making eggs the morning I saw the news. Federal agents with search warrants, Meridian's headquarters, multiple executive names, Patricia Richardson's prominently among them. Laptops in evidence bags, filing cabinets emptied, conference rooms sealed. The building I had walked out of 12 days earlier, glass and steel and carefully maintained corporate calm, had become something entirely different overnight. Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division called me 2 days later. She was direct in the way that people become when they are working against a timeline. Mr. Anderson, your security framework has become a significant element of our evidence in an ongoing investigation. We need your help understanding the flagging logic and the authorization records your system preserved. This would be consulting, work, formal engagement, documented, scope. She named a rate, $180 an hour. Several months of expected work. We met the following morning at a coffee shop downtown. Nothing cinematic about it. Mediocre coffee, a corner table, a federal agent with a tablet full of records and questions that only the person who built the system could answer accurately. I spent 4 hours explaining architecture decisions I had made years ago, flag thresholds I had set based on patterns I had observed, and why certain kinds of authorization anomalies had been classified as high-priority alerts rather than routine variances. What struck me, sitting there with Agent Collins, was how ordinary it felt. Not triumphant, not emotional, just the work I had always done, applied to a situation I had never anticipated. The system had done what I designed it to do. Now I was explaining the design to people who needed to understand it. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, the story had moved past merger collapse and into territory that included defense contract fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. The names of shell companies connected to some of Meridian's vendor payments began appearing in federal filings. The backdated approvals my system had flagged corresponded to contracts that, on examination, had been altered to redirect funds to entities that shared beneficial ownership with people inside Meridian's executive structure. Patricia had not simply fired me because I was slow or difficult or misaligned with the company's direction. She had fired me because I was the one person at Meridian whose job was specifically to notice when something did not add up. And for the past 18 months, things had not been adding up, and I had been slowing down approvals and asking questions and creating friction that she could not afford. She had solved the friction by eliminating it. The system I left behind solved the problem of Patricia. After the investigation went public, my phone changed character entirely. For weeks, it had been a source of unemployment reminders and LinkedIn notifications for positions I was supposedly too experienced for. Now it rang with calls from companies I had not contacted, defense contractors, cybersecurity firms, infrastructure consultancies that managed systems for federal clients. 3 separate offers came in before the end of the month, all above $250,000. The same industry that had let a 58-year-old walk out the door of a company he had built half the infrastructure for was now describing his background as critical and his availability as an opportunity. Experience looks different when losing it has a documented cost. Ryan was at the kitchen table, doing calculus when I accepted Pinnacle's offer formally. He had been quieter than usual for the past 2 weeks. The kind of quiet that teenagers perform when they have figured out that adults are managing something difficult, and they are not sure whether asking will make it worse. He looked up from his notebook when I ended the call. "Good news," he asked. His pencil was still in his hand. I looked at the MIT folder on the counter. I had not opened it in over a week because every page inside reminded me of numbers I was not sure I could still guarantee. "Very good news," I said. "Your tuition just got considerably less complicated." His face changed in the way faces change when relief is mixed with something it does not have a name for yet. He looked at me for a moment. The way you look at something you were not entirely sure was still there. "Dad," he said quietly, "you're actually smiling. I haven't seen you do that since Mom." The words landed somewhere I was not prepared for them to land. Sarah had been gone for 3 years. After the cancer took her, work had become the place I stored my days. The structure of it, the problems and the systems and the emergencies that needed solving, had been easier than the alternative, which was sitting in a quiet house with the full weight of her absence and no project to redirect it toward. Maybe Meridian doing what it did had forced open something I had been successfully avoiding. I sat down at the table across from my son. "She would have thought this was funny," I said. "The whole thing. She always said the quietest people in any room were the ones you needed to pay attention to." Ryan smiled at that. She was right. She usually was. 6 months later, the sentencing made the news in the financial and legal sections. Patricia Richardson stood in federal court and heard a judge sentence her to 8 years in federal prison. The courtroom was nothing like the conference room she had performed in. No cameras, no investors, no polished audience arranged for maximum effect. Just a federal judge, an overdue accounting, and a woman who looked smaller than I remembered. The judge's remarks included a specific reference to the security framework that had preserved the evidence she had attempted to erase. He noted that the system's documentation had been so complete and so precisely organized that it had substantially simplified the government's case. Every altered contract, every irregular payment, every false authorization attempt had been logged with timestamps that could not be adjusted after the fact. I was not in that courtroom. I had been asked by Agent Collins if I wanted to observe the proceedings, and I had said no. Not because of indifference, because I had already received what I needed from the situation, which was not Patricia's punishment. It was the understanding that the work I had done for 32 years had mattered, that the systems I had built had done what they were built to do, that the version of me who had stayed quiet in that conference room and carried my things to the parking lot without argument had been right to trust what he had built. Meridian did not survive the scandal. The bankruptcy filing came within the quarter, assets liquidated to cover federal fines and creditor obligations. The employees dispersed across the industry, some landing well, others spending months explaining their association with a company that had become a cautionary case study. I did not take pleasure in the collapse. Most of the people in that building had not been architects of what Patricia built. They had been employees trying to keep their families stable in the same way I had been trying to keep mine stable. Silence is not the same thing as complicity, though it sometimes looks similar from a distance. Jim Walsh was one of the people I made a point to remember. He had walked me out of Meridian with shame in his eyes and apology in his posture, following a protocol he had not written, executing a decision he clearly believed was wrong. He had done it because he had children and a mortgage, and because standing up in that moment would have cost him things he could not afford to lose. I understood that math completely. A few weeks after things settled, I sent his name to Pinnacle's security director with one sentence. This man knows how to do the right thing under pressure. He was hired before the month ended. When he called to thank me, his voice had that particular roughness that men get when they are trying not to let an emotion through that they were not expecting. Tom, after how things ended, I didn't think you'd ever put yourself out for anyone from that place. I thought about that for a moment. You didn't betray me, Jim. You were trapped in the same building I was. There's a difference. Pinnacle was different from Meridian in ways that I had not let myself hope for in the weeks after I was fired. The difference was not primarily the salary or the title or the equity options, though all of those were meaningful. The difference was what happened when I walked into a room. People listened, not performatively, not because of hierarchy, but because they actually wanted to know what the person who had built a system capable of preserving an entire fraud investigation thought about how to approach the next problem. My team challenged my ideas, which I considered a good sign. They were not looking for someone to defer to. They were looking for someone to think alongside. At 58, after more than 3 decades of being the experienced one in rooms that treated experience as something slightly embarrassing, I had finally found a room that knew what to do with it. Ryan started his freshman year at MIT that fall without a student loan attached to his name. On move-in day, I helped him carry boxes across campus in the kind of late summer heat that makes everything feel significant. He had that particular ease around other people that his mother had always had, moving through introductions and new situations with a comfort that I had never managed to fully inherit. Later in the afternoon, when the boxes were unpacked and the room was starting to look like a space someone might actually inhabit, he told me that a group of students had asked about our family over dinner. I told them my mom passed away a few years ago, he said. And when they asked what my dad does, I said you build systems that can't be broken or bypassed. I said you're like a locksmith for the kind of infrastructure that actually matters. He smiled. They thought that was pretty cool. I laughed. It was the kind of laugh that surprises you because it comes from somewhere you did not know still had room for that. By the end of that year, the mortgage was paid off. My retirement accounts were back on track. Pinnacle had raised my responsibilities and was discussing an expanded role overseeing the entire cybersecurity division's strategic direction. At 58, I had believed I was being shown the door that all older workers eventually find waiting for them. Instead, I had walked through it into something better. Some evenings I stay late in my office after everyone else is gone. The building is quiet in a way Meridian never was, because at Meridian there was always the background static of something urgent, some system flagging, some approval that could not wait, some problem that had Tom Anderson's name on it by default. Here, the quiet is genuine. The city lights come through the windows steady and even. One night I found myself holding my phone, aware that somewhere in my storage I had kept a voicemail from Patricia. The one where her voice had lost its polish and her careful construction had shown through. I had kept it without fully understanding why. Maybe for evidence. Maybe because some part of me needed to know that the woman who had fired me on camera had eventually understood what she had done. I sat there for a long moment, and then I deleted it without playing it again. The silence after that felt correct, not empty, not triumphant, just clean. The silence of a door that has fully closed. There is something I have thought about often since all of this happened. Not the legal outcome, not the job, not even the vindication of watching a system do exactly what it was designed to do at exactly the moment it was most needed. What I think about most is the meeting itself. The cameras and the podium and the board members and the careful arrangement of witnesses. Patricia had not simply been firing me. She had been staging something. A demonstration of authority for an audience of investors and board members who needed to see that she could make hard decisions without flinching. I was not an employee being let go. I was a prop in a performance about how decisive she was. What she did not consider was that props sometimes remember things. Sometimes the best answer to people who want to make you disappear is not confrontation, not anger, not the immediate satisfaction of telling them exactly what you think in the moment they least deserve your silence. Sometimes the best answer is to trust what you built, step back and let the truth work on its own schedule. Meridian wanted me gone. I let myself be gone. And then I let the system I had built speak in the language that mattered, which was the language of evidence, of timestamps, of authorization logs that told the complete story of everything Patricia thought she had buried. She called me outdated. She called me a legacy role. She put me in front of cameras and performed my dismissal for an audience. But the system I built survived every attempt to work around it. The evidence it preserved outlasted every lie she told. And at 58, I am doing the most meaningful work of my career, in a place that knows exactly what to do with what I know. They tried to make me disappear, but they forgot one thing. Systems remember what people try to erase. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. Would you have stayed quiet and let the system work? Or would you have confronted them the moment you knew what they were doing? Subscribe for more stories about the kind of quiet strength that people in power always seem to underestimate until it is far too late.